Chapter 1. The Unfinished Mystery. When World War II finally came to an end, one major question remained unanswered. What happened to the enormous wealth seized by Nazi Germany across Europe? The treasure did not simply vanish when Germany surrendered. Instead, its final journey began during the last chaotic months of the war. As Allied forces advanced from the west and Soviet troops pushed relentlessly from the east, Nazi officials launched a desperate effort to protect the financial resources of the collapsing Reich. Two parallel operations were set into motion. The first focused on safeguarding the regime's financial reserves. Massive quantities of gold, foreign currency, securities, and valuable assets were transferred into heavily protected underground facilities, hidden deep beneath the German countryside. The second operation followed a very different path. Valuable assets were quietly moved through international networks, taking advantage of neutral countries, functioning banking systems, and the growing administrative chaos inside Germany. A significant amount of gold crossed the Pyrenees through the international railway station of Canfranc. From there, it entered Swiss financial channels before being redistributed to Spain and Portugal in exchange for strategic materials essential to Germany's war industry. At the same time, retreating German units adopted more improvised methods. Across Europe, valuables were hidden, abandoned, or secretly buried as military defeat became inevitable. Some of those hidden caches would remain undiscovered for decades. Others would become the source of legends that continue to fascinate historians and treasure hunters to this day. This is the story of how the wealth of the Third Reich was dispersed during the final months of the war, and why a substantial portion of it has never been recovered. Chapter 2. The Financial Heart of the Reich. By early 1945, Berlin was no longer a safe haven, even for the most heavily protected institutions of Nazi Germany. On February 3rd, a massive Allied bombing raid struck the administrative center of the German capital. Among the targets was the Reichsbank, the central bank of the Third Reich, and the foundation of its financial system. The attack caused severe damage. Sections of the building were rendered unusable, communications collapsed, and thousands of employees rushed into underground shelters as explosions shook the city above them. Although the vaults survived, the message was impossible to ignore. The financial heart of the Reich remained concentrated inside a city that was rapidly becoming indefensible. For years, the Reichsbank had played a critical role in managing Germany's economic resources, but under Nazi rule, its function extended far beyond traditional banking. Gold seized from occupied nations flowed into its vaults. Foreign currency reserves were absorbed into the system. Assets taken from governments, institutions, and individuals across Europe were processed through Berlin. As the war expanded, the Reichsbank became one of the central hubs through which enormous quantities of wealth passed. By 1945, the institution controlled assets valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. These holdings included more than 100 tons of gold, vast quantities of foreign currency, financial securities, industrial silver, and countless other valuables. Yet all of this wealth faced a growing threat. The Allied armies were advancing. Soviet forces were closing in from the east. Every passing week brought the collapse of another defensive line. Keeping such a concentration of assets inside Berlin had become an unacceptable risk. An urgent decision was made. The Reich's most valuable reserves would be evacuated and hidden deep underground. The chosen destination was the Kaiserode mine near the town of Merkers, located more than 300 kilometers from Berlin. Buried beneath layers of rock, the mine offered security, secrecy, and protection from aerial bombardment. On February 9, 1945, the first convoy departed the capital, carrying enormous quantities of paper currency and foreign cash reserves. Just days later, the most sensitive shipment began. Train wagons loaded with approximately 100 tons of gold moved toward Merkers under strict security measures. The transfer took several days to complete, and once the cargo arrived, it was transported into a specially prepared underground chamber. Alongside the gold were thousands of bags filled with coins from numerous countries, foreign currencies, securities, and other valuable assets. Deep beneath the earth, the financial core of Nazi Germany had been concentrated into a single, hidden location. For a brief period, the operation appeared successful. The treasure remained secure, protected from air attacks, and far from the chaos consuming Berlin. But events on the battlefield were unfolding far more quickly than Nazi planners expected. By late March 1945, Allied forces had crossed the Rhine River and were advancing rapidly into central Germany. The front lines were collapsing, and the hidden treasure beneath Merkers was about to be discovered. Chapter 3. The Discovery of the World Will Own Press. Chapter 3. The Discovery of the World Will Own Press. For several weeks, the operation at Merkers appeared to be a success. Hidden deep underground, the Reich's financial reserves remained untouched, while Germany continued to collapse around them. The mine provided everything Nazi officials had hoped for: security, secrecy, and protection from Allied air attacks. But by the spring of 1945, events were moving faster than anyone could control. The Western Front had broken apart. American forces were advancing deep into Germany, capturing towns and cities at a remarkable pace. As military resistance weakened, the carefully planned evacuation of the Reich's wealth began to unravel. On April 4, 1945, units of General George S. Patton's Third Army reached the region surrounding Merkers. German authorities attempted to organize emergency evacuations, but the situation had become impossible. Railway lines were disrupted, road networks were overwhelmed, communication systems were failing across the country. While some paper currency was removed from the mine, enormous quantities remained behind. The gold itself presented an even greater challenge. Its sheer weight made evacuation virtually impossible. As American forces approached, the treasure remained exactly where it had been stored, deep inside Chamber 8. The hidden vault contained one of the largest concentrations of wealth ever discovered during the war. American soldiers soon uncovered an astonishing collection of assets. Stacked inside the underground chambers were gold bars, foreign currency reserves, securities, precious metals, rare valuables, and thousands of bags filled with coins from across Europe. The scale of the discovery stunned military officials. What they had found was not merely a hidden cache, it was the financial heart of a collapsing empire. Photographs taken inside the mine revealed endless rows of valuables stored beneath the earth. For Allied investigators, the discovery provided direct evidence of the vast economic system that had supported Nazi Germany throughout the conflict. Yet, despite the magnitude of the find, an important question remained unanswered. If such a large portion of the Reich's wealth had been recovered at Merkers, why did stories of missing Nazi treasure continue to emerge for decades afterward? The answer lay elsewhere. Not all assets had been transferred to Merkers, not all valuables remained inside Germany, and not every shipment reached its intended destination. As the war entered its final months, rumors began to circulate about special convoys carrying gold, jewelry, documents, and other valuable cargo away from the advancing front lines. One story in particular would become legendary. It centered on a mysterious train that supposedly vanished somewhere in the mountains of Lower Silesia. According to post-war accounts, the convoy departed from Breslau, modern-day Wrocław, as Soviet forces closed in on the region. The train was said to be carrying valuable assets evacuated from government institutions, banks, and administrative centers. But unlike countless other wartime transports, this convoy never appeared in official records at its final destination. Some believed it had been diverted. Others claimed it had been hidden deliberately. Over time, the story evolved into one of Europe's most enduring mysteries, the legend of the Nazi gold train. For decades, treasure hunters, historians, and local residents searched for clues. The alleged hiding place was repeatedly linked to the mountainous area surrounding Wałbrzych, a region filled with tunnels, mines, and unfinished underground structures built during the war. At the center of these theories stood a vast construction project known as Project Riese, and it was there that one of the greatest treasure hunts of the modern era would eventually begin. Chapter 4: The Legend of the Nazi Gold Train. As Allied forces celebrated victory in Europe, a new mystery began to take shape beneath the mountains of Lower Silesia. It was a story that would survive for generations, a story of a train loaded with gold that vanished without a trace. According to testimonies collected after the war, a special convoy departed from Breslau during the final months of the conflict. As Soviet troops advanced toward the city, German authorities scrambled to evacuate valuable assets from the region. The train was reportedly carrying gold, jewelry, important documents, and other valuable cargo removed from banks and government institutions. Yet, unlike ordinary transports, this convoy never appeared in records at its supposed destination. Somewhere along its route, it seemed to disappear. The most popular theory suggested that the train had been diverted onto a secondary railway line and concealed inside a hidden underground tunnel. The location most frequently mentioned was the mountainous region near Wałbrzych. This area was uniquely suited to such speculation. Beneath its forests and valleys lay an extensive network of mines, tunnels, and unfinished underground facilities constructed during the final years of the war. At the center of these stories stood Project Riese. Project Riese was no myth. It was a massive underground construction program launched by the Third Reich. Deep inside the mountains, workers carved tunnels, chambers, and technical galleries into solid rock. To this day, historians continue to debate the project's ultimate purpose. Some believe it was intended to serve as a military command center. Others argue that it may have been designed for industrial production or strategic shelter complexes. What is certain is that the project consumed enormous resources and relied heavily on forced labor. Thousands of prisoners were compelled to work under brutal conditions. Many never survived. When Germany collapsed in 1945, construction stopped abruptly, leaving behind a labyrinth of unfinished underground structures that would later fuel decades of speculation. The region's railway infrastructure only strengthened the mystery. Lower Silesia contained countless industrial lines, service routes, and transportation corridors linking mines, factories, and military facilities. During the final months of the war, special evacuation trains frequently operated outside normal schedules. Many transported sensitive cargo, government archives, and strategic resources away from advancing Soviet forces. As Germany's administrative system disintegrated, countless records were destroyed, lost, or scattered. The absence of complete documentation created the perfect environment for legends to flourish. For decades, stories circulated about sealed tunnels, hidden chambers, and trains buried beneath the mountains. Among the strongest supporters of the theory was a local researcher named Tadeusz Slowikowski. Beginning in the 1950s, he spent decades collecting testimonies, studying old maps, and investigating wartime rumors. According to several accounts he gathered, railway workers had spoken of unusual train movements shortly before Soviet forces entered the region. Some even claimed that access points had been sealed and hidden. Whether these stories reflected reality remained impossible to prove, yet the legend refused to die. Throughout the Cold War, occasional searches were conducted, but no definitive evidence ever emerged. Still, many believed that somewhere beneath the mountains, a lost wartime treasure remained hidden. Then, in 2015, everything changed. Two independent researchers announced that they had identified what appeared to be a large underground object using ground-penetrating radar near Wałbrzych. According to their measurements, the anomaly resembled a long structure buried deep beneath the surface. The announcement triggered international headlines. News organizations around the world reported the possibility that the legendary Nazi gold train had finally been found. Excitement spread rapidly. Treasure hunters arrived. Television crews descended upon the region. government officials reviewed the claims. For the first time in decades, the world believed the mystery might finally be solved. But science was about to put the legend to the ultimate test. Chapter 5. The Search That Shook the World. In the summer of 2015, a story that had lingered in the shadows for decades suddenly returned to the global spotlight. Two independent researchers announced that they had located what they believed was the legendary Nazi gold train. Using ground-penetrating radar technology, they reported the discovery of a large underground anomaly near Wałbrzych in Lower Silesia. According to their analysis, the object appeared to be more than 100 meters long and buried approximately 50 meters beneath the surface. The dimensions seemed consistent with a railway convoy. Within days, the announcement spread across international media. Television networks, newspapers, historians, and treasure hunters from around the world focused their attention on a quiet region of southwestern Poland. The possibility was electrifying. Could one of the greatest wartime mysteries finally be solved? The excitement intensified when government officials publicly acknowledged the reports. After reviewing preliminary findings, Poland's Deputy Minister of Culture stated that there was a very high probability that a large underground object existed at the location. Although he carefully avoided identifying the object as a train, the statement fueled even greater speculation. Around the world, headlines exploded with excitement. Some articles spoke of hidden gold. Others described lost military archives, priceless artworks, or secret wartime technology. For a brief moment, it seemed as though history itself might be about to emerge from beneath the mountains. The researchers behind the discovery formally submitted their claim and requested a percentage of the value of any potential treasure recovered. As public interest grew, Polish authorities authorized a scientific investigation. The goal was simple: separate fact from speculation. Independent experts began examining the radar data. Specialists from leading scientific institutions reviewed the images and conducted detailed technical assessments. Their conclusions would dramatically alter the narrative. By late 2015, researchers from the AGH University of Science and Technology in Krakow completed their analysis. The results were disappointing for treasure hunters. According to the experts, the radar images did not provide evidence of railway cars, large metallic structures, or a buried train. Instead, the detected anomalies were consistent with natural geological formations commonly found in heavily mined terrain. The underground features could be explained by natural cavities, collapsed tunnels, or irregular rock formations. The scientific findings raised another important question. If a train had truly been buried underground, what would have been required to accomplish such a feat? Engineers pointed out that hiding an entire railway convoy would have involved a massive operation. Excavation equipment would have been needed. Railway tracks would have required modification. Large access points would have had to be sealed. Numerous workers would likely have participated in the project. Most importantly, such activities would have left unmistakable physical traces. Yet none of these indicators appeared in the available evidence. Despite the growing skepticism, authorities decided to proceed with a full excavation. The world watched closely. If a train existed, this would be the moment it would finally be revealed. In August 2016, excavation teams arrived at the site. Geologists, archaeologists, engineers, and technical specialists worked together under official supervision. Heavy machinery was brought in. Survey equipment was deployed. The suspected location was carefully investigated. Days passed, then weeks. The results became increasingly clear. No railway tracks were found. No train cars appeared. No hidden chambers were uncovered. No evidence supported the existence of a buried convoy. The excavation ended without discovering a single object connected to the legendary train. After decades of speculation and months of worldwide attention, the conclusion was unavoidable. There was no Nazi gold train beneath the mountains of Wałbrzych. The legend had failed the test of scientific verification, yet the story itself refused to disappear. because while the train may never have existed, the circumstances that gave birth to the legend were very real. The region contained extensive underground tunnels. Wartime construction projects had been abandoned without explanation. Important records had vanished during the collapse of the Third Reich, and countless questions about missing wartime assets remained unanswered. The train was gone, or perhaps it had never been there at all. But one mystery still remained. If the lost wealth of Nazi Germany was not hidden beneath the mountains of Silesia, then where had it gone? The answer would lead investigators away from tunnels and treasure hunts and toward international borders, financial institutions, and a forgotten railway station hidden deep within the Pyrenees Mountains. Chapter 6: The Secret Gold Route Through the Pyrenees. While Allied forces were uncovering hidden treasure inside Germany, a significant portion of Nazi wealth had already taken a very different path. It was not buried underground. It was not hidden inside abandoned tunnels. Instead, it traveled across international borders through a carefully organized financial network that remained active even as the war approached its final stages. The route led south, beyond the battlefields, beyond the collapsing front lines, and into the towering mountains of the Pyrenees. Between 1942 and 1944, a remote railway station known as Canfranc became one of the most important transit points in Europe. Located on the border between France and Spain, Canfranc served as a vital connection between occupied Europe and the Iberian Peninsula. At first glance, it appeared to be an ordinary international railway station. In reality, it played a much larger role. The station contained customs facilities, warehouses, underground passages, and direct railway connections linking two countries during one of the most turbulent periods in modern history. As other transportation routes became increasingly restricted, Canfranc emerged as a critical corridor through which goods, materials, and financial assets could continue to move. Among those assets was gold. Large quantities of precious metal passed through the station during the war years. According to official records that later surfaced, more than 80 tons of gold originating from Switzerland crossed through Canfranc. The shipments were carefully documented. Freight trains and transport vehicles carried the cargo through customs inspections before it continued toward destinations in Spain and Portugal. The operation was neither random nor improvised. It formed part of a sophisticated international financial network. Before reaching Canfranc, gold linked to Nazi-controlled territories had already entered the Swiss banking system. There, it was melted, refined, or reprocessed, making its original source increasingly difficult to trace. Once transformed, the gold could be transported as legally recognized bullion through official commercial channels. On paper, everything appeared legitimate, yet behind the paperwork lay a far more complex reality. In exchange for these financial transactions, Germany received strategic materials essential to its war industry. Tungsten, iron, and other critical resources continued flowing toward the Reich despite the growing pressure of the conflict. Canfranc became one of the key gateways that made this exchange possible. The station itself operated under extraordinary security. Witnesses later recalled seeing shipments escorted by armed personnel as cargo moved swiftly through customs areas and loading platforms. The objective was clear: minimize delays, reduce exposure, and keep valuable shipments moving efficiently across the border. When the war finally ended, the station's role gradually faded from public memory. Political circumstances helped ensure that many details remained hidden. The border region became heavily controlled, and access was often restricted. For decades, relatively little attention was paid to what had passed through Canfranc during the war years. Then, many years later, an unexpected discovery changed everything. In 2000, a French railway employee named Jonathan Diaz came across a collection of forgotten documents inside abandoned sections of the station. The papers were in poor condition. Many had been damaged by moisture and years of neglect. Yet they contained something remarkable: official records, customs reports, government communications, detailed references to gold shipments that had moved through Canfranc during the 1940s. Carefully preserved and organized, the documents provided dates, quantities, transportation routes, and administrative details that matched accounts provided by former railway workers and officials. The evidence painted a clear picture. Canfranc had not been a minor transit point. It had served as a crucial link in a larger international system through which enormous quantities of wealth moved during the war. The discovery attracted public attention and renewed interest in the station's hidden history. What emerged was a startling realization. A substantial portion of Nazi-linked gold had not vanished into secret tunnels or remote mountain bunkers. It had traveled openly through established financial channels, protected by documentation, institutions, and international commerce. The gold had not disappeared, it had been absorbed, integrated into systems designed to make its origins increasingly difficult to trace. Yet even this was only part of the story. Not all Nazi wealth followed official routes. Not every treasure entered international banking networks. In some cases, the final days of the war produced far more chaotic outcomes. As Germany collapsed, retreating units sometimes buried valuables wherever they could, hoping to recover them later. One such case would remain hidden inside government archives for more than 70 years. Its trail would eventually lead investigators to a quiet village in the Netherlands, and to another mystery that refused to die. Chapter 7. The Lost Treasure of Ommeren. Not every piece of Nazi wealth followed carefully organized financial routes. As the Third Reich collapsed during the final months of World War II, discipline within many German units began to break down. Communication networks failed, command structures weakened, and countless soldiers found themselves isolated from central authority. In that atmosphere of chaos, valuable assets were often hidden wherever an opportunity presented itself. One of the most intriguing examples emerged decades later in a small Dutch village called Ommeren. The story began in September 1944. At the time, Allied forces were conducting Operation Market Garden, one of the most ambitious offensives of the war. During the fighting, a bank branch in the city of Arnhem suffered severe damage following an air attack. Before abandoning the area, German soldiers reportedly removed valuables from the building: jewelry, gold coins, luxury watches, small gold bars, and other precious items. According to surviving records, the loot was packed into several transport boxes and loaded onto a military vehicle. The convoy then traveled roughly 40 kilometers eastward into the countryside. Its destination was the quiet agricultural region surrounding Ommeren. Far from major military routes and largely untouched by the intense fighting, the area appeared to offer the perfect hiding place. According to later testimony, the valuables were buried in an open field, using natural landmarks as reference points. There were no permanent markers, no reinforced chambers, no elaborate underground vaults. Only a few visible features in the landscape that could guide those who intended to return. But the war ended before that could happen. After Germany's defeat, information about the burial site eventually reached Dutch authorities. During investigations conducted in 1946 and 1947, a former German soldier claimed to possess direct knowledge of the hidden treasure. His statements led investigators to create a handwritten map showing the alleged location. The map was accompanied by reports, correspondence, and official documentation produced by Dutch authorities. Convinced that the information might be genuine, the government organized an official search. Excavation teams examined the area indicated on the map. They dug carefully. They followed the available references. Yet nothing was found. No treasure, no transport boxes, no trace of the valuables. With no further leads available, the investigation was closed. The documents were archived, and over time, the story faded into obscurity. For more than 75 years, the case remained hidden from public view. Then, in January 2023, everything changed. The National Archives of the Netherlands released thousands of previously restricted post-war files. Among them was the complete Ommeren treasure file. Included were the original map, witness statements, investigative reports, and official correspondence related to the case. The publication immediately attracted worldwide attention. News organizations reported the discovery, treasure hunters became interested, and curious visitors began arriving in the village carrying metal detectors and excavation equipment. Local authorities quickly intervened. The area was protected under heritage regulations, and unauthorized digging was prohibited. Officials also warned that unexploded wartime munitions remained a potential danger in the region. As public interest continued to grow, a new official investigation was authorized. This time, modern technology would be used. In May 2023, archaeologists and technical specialists began a carefully supervised excavation. Advanced detection systems were employed before trenches were opened at locations corresponding to the historical map. The search was thorough. Every promising signal was examined. Every relevant section of land was investigated. Once again, expectations grew. And once again, the results proved disappointing. No treasure was found. No transport boxes appeared. No evidence confirmed the existence of buried valuables at the indicated location. After analyzing the findings, investigators proposed several possible explanations. The treasure may have been recovered by unknown individuals shortly after the war. It may have been removed before the original search in 1947, or the map itself may have lacked sufficient accuracy, making the true location impossible to identify decades later. Whatever the explanation, the outcome remained the same. The treasure of Ommeren was never recovered. Yet, the case revealed something important. Not all Nazi loot was handled through organized financial systems. Not all valuables were documented. Not all hidden assets followed carefully planned routes. In many cases, wealth simply vanished into the confusion of a collapsing regime. Its survival depended entirely on fragile maps, fading memories, and incomplete testimonies. The Ommeren mystery offered a glimpse into a much larger phenomenon. Across Europe, countless valuables disappeared during the final stages of the war. Some were recovered, many were not. And as investigators continued to follow the trail of missing assets, a larger question began to emerge. What happened to the vast quantities of wealth that successfully crossed international borders and entered legitimate financial institutions? The answer would reveal a far deeper story, one involving post-war agreements, international banking systems, and a process that transformed disputed wartime assets into accepted components of the modern financial world. Chapter 8. How the missing wealth was legitimized after the war. When World War II ended, many believed that the looted wealth of Nazi Germany would eventually be traced, recovered, and returned to its rightful owners. The reality proved far more complicated. By 1945, investigators faced an enormous challenge. Some assets had been recovered from hidden depots, such as Merkers. Others had been identified within international banking systems. But a substantial portion of the wealth had already become deeply embedded in financial networks that stretched across multiple countries. Tracing its origins was becoming increasingly difficult, and with each passing year, the task grew more complex. Between 1946 and 1951, Allied authorities established specialized organizations responsible for locating financial assets connected to the former Reich. Their mission was ambitious: track hidden wealth, identify foreign holdings, and facilitate restitution whenever possible. However, the post-war world faced new priorities. Europe lay in ruins. Governments were focused on rebuilding economies, stabilizing currencies, and preventing further political instability. As a result, economic reconstruction often took precedence over the complete recovery of wartime assets. A major turning point arrived in 1953. That year, representatives from several nations signed the London Debt Agreement, a landmark treaty that helped define the financial future of West Germany. The agreement restructured German debt and provided the foundation for economic recovery. At the same time, many unresolved claims connected to wartime assets were effectively pushed into the background. Questions regarding ownership, restitution, and financial responsibility became increasingly difficult to pursue. As decades passed, another problem emerged. Gold and other precious metals that had entered international banking systems were frequently melted, refined, and combined with existing reserves. Once that process occurred, identifying their original source became nearly impossible. Bars were recast, records became fragmented, ownership trails disappeared. What had once been identifiable assets gradually transformed into anonymous components of larger financial reserves. For private individuals who had lost valuables during the war, the situation was even more complicated. There was often no practical legal mechanism capable of tracing and returning assets once they had entered global financial systems. The passage of time only deepened the problem. During the 1960s and 1970s, public discussion surrounding these issues largely faded. Many important archives remained inaccessible. Financial secrecy laws restricted access to critical records. Some documents were lost, others were destroyed according to administrative procedures. As a result, entire chapters of the story became increasingly difficult to reconstruct. For decades, the trail grew colder. Then, during the 1990s, renewed investigations brought the issue back into public attention. Researchers, historians, financial experts, and international organizations began re-examining wartime transactions and dormant accounts. New evidence emerged. Previously unseen documents were uncovered. Long-forgotten financial records were reviewed. These investigations revealed the enormous scale of assets that had moved through international institutions during and after the war. Yet even then, a complete reconstruction proved impossible. Too much time had passed. Too many records had vanished. Too many transactions had become disconnected from their original sources. The findings pointed toward a remarkable conclusion. The missing wealth had not simply disappeared. Much of it had been absorbed into legitimate economic systems. Over time, political agreements, financial restructuring, and institutional practices transformed disputed wartime assets into accepted components of the post-war financial world. The process occurred gradually, year after year, decade after decade, until what had once been controversial became ordinary. The greatest mystery was no longer the location of hidden treasure. It was how enormous quantities of wealth could pass through history and eventually lose all visible connection to their origins. In the end, the story of Nazi treasure is not merely a story about gold. It is a story about power, about institutions, about war, memory, and the challenges of justice after one of history's most devastating conflicts. Some treasures were found, others were lost forever. But the most remarkable discovery may be this: the wealth never truly vanished. In many cases, it simply changed form, changed hands, and became part of a world that moved forward while leaving countless questions unanswered. And even today, decades after the guns fell silent, those questions continue to fascinate historians, investigators, and anyone drawn to one of the greatest financial mysteries of the 20th century.